right, guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm hanging out with Brent Malysh, CEO of Backroads Brewing in Nelson, BC. How you doing, man?
I'm well, thanks.
Thanks for taking the time and sharing your story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's go from the beginning. Usually I get right into like the brewery, but I'm really interested in just your story.
Yeah.
You were born in Nelson.
Born in Nelson,
but
correct.
you're actually raised in Vancouver.
Raised in Vancouver. Yeah, we left when I was 3 or 4, maybe, something like that.
Yeah. So it's kind of fun to kind of, what I want to do is learn how you kind of came full circle and ended up back here. So growing up, you wanted to be a hockey player, which kind of surprised me because your background isn't in hockey. So.
It's, no, it's not in hockey, but I was a diehard hockey player first and foremost.
Nice.
And a skier second. So.
And so did you grow up also skiing?
Yeah, we did. We would go like 2 weeks, a week at Christmas and a week at spring break, and go ski in Vernon. That's where my dad was from, so we always skied at Silver Star. And but in between that, I played hockey all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, because when I was growing up, I played hockey, and my dad was like, "There's no chance in hell I'm buying you all the hockey gear and then all the ski gear." So it's kind of like until I could, pay for my own stuff, it was like you choose a sport and go with it. So
yeah,
I was hockey.
We were fortunate. I think Dad was a longtime skier, and he had some connections to some ski folks. So I don't think he had to spend very much money on the skiing side for us, and it was always hand-me-down gear and things like that. But yeah, hockey was always the first thing going ahead, and it didn't really change until like grade 8, I think, when I joined the high school ski club, and then we started skiing at Whistler, and that's when it started to be like, well, I'm kind of a better skier than I am a hockey player, and I'm never going to be a pro. And then that's when I fell in love with skiing, was once I started going to Whistler with my buddies all the time.
Yeah. So what is, when you think, that's one place I've never been is Whistler. Like, maybe explain, like, what is that like relative to, let's say, Whitewater and stuff like that?
Like Disneyland or Las Vegas for skiing.
Yeah.
Like, it's overload. But the mountain itself, the skiing is the best in the world. So like, I've been privileged to ski all over North America and all over Europe, and Whistler is easily top 3 favorite places in the world to go skiing. But I could do without all the craziness of the village these days. Yeah, for sure.
That just means you're getting old, I think.
Yeah, a little bit.
Kidding.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, so you grew up in Vancouver. You spent a lot of your 20s kind of traveling.
Yeah.
Any kind of favorite destinations for you when you were in that kind of mode?
Yeah, so I spent 3 winters living in Switzerland, and that was by far and away my favorite place to go. Probably because it was so similar to being in British Columbia. Like, you're just in the mountains and the lakes, and the skiing was phenomenal, and culture was really cool. And I was all over Europe and skiing in Australia and working down there and working on cruise ships in the summertime, kind of just bouncing around, just doing random fun stuff. But yeah, I loved the Alps. That was such a cool experience. So
skiing in Australia, what would that have been like? I mean, compared to, growing up kind of spoiled, what was it even comparable to Canada?
No, it's wet snow.
Right.
If it snows at all, it could be raining sideways. The mountains are really flat. They're super old, the snowy mountains. So they're kind of really rounded on top, and there's not a lot of expert terrain. And then of course, it's just all set in a place where there aren't a lot of diehard. There are a lot of diehard skiers. I shouldn't say that, but overall, there's a lot of people that just are not familiar with winter culture.
Right.
And they come down there for this little exotic taste of winter in the middle of what we would think of as a hot and sunny country. So it's interesting, to say the least. It makes you a good skier real quick because you have to deal with such garbage conditions.
Yeah, it's like
all the time.
Worst kind of ski, like spring conditions you can imagine.
It's so variable. In any given day, you're gonna ski every single type of ski condition there is and weather condition. It's definitely a test of your endurance when you want to spend a whole day out in sideways rain and slushy snow. And
that's awesome. One of the things that caught me off guard or caught me by surprise in your notes is you said you're a DJ on a cruise ship.
Yeah, DJ is probably a bit of a I shouldn't say glorified. It's a bit of a strong word for what I did. Yeah. I pretty much plugged in iPods into a sound system and played requests of top 40 hits, but
Isn't that what DJs do these days?
Seems like it. You're in Nelson. You're getting hate mail from the Nelsonites around here. It was just sort of a funny thing that I sort of fell backwards into through a friend of a friend, and I ended up getting a bunch of contracts to go and play in these nightclubs on cruise ships. And a lot of the cruise ships would have a nightclub for over 21-year-olds and a separate nightclub for like 16 to 20-year-olds.
Oh, wow.
And so I would always be the DJ in the 16 to 20-year-old nightclub.
Yeah.
So it was hilarious. I'd be on a contract somewhere in the world, and it would be, a 2-month or a 3-month stint on board, and I would work 6 days a week.
Yeah.
From like 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. And then I would have the rest of the time off. And I was considered an officer on the ship, so I had a half a stripe in terms of rank, which means I could go anywhere on the boat during the day. I could hang out with the passengers. Like you just got to sort of be on a cruise the whole time.
Yeah.
And you stayed in a better cabin than the regular staff did because you were part of the entertainment department, so they treated you better. And
nice.
It was just a hilarious sort of thing, but they gave you money for it. Like I couldn't. It was just like, how is this a thing?
They could have just let me on the boat.
I would have done it for free. There's room and board. They're flying you around the world to go jump on different, get on at different ports and stuff like that. Like it was kind of a fun thing to do. But
and then so, at a certain point you decide you want to go to school. So this would have been early 2000s.
Yeah, we're talking 2004, 2005.
Yeah.
And I finally decided I'm 24 years old and 6 years out of high school, 5 years out of high school. I better start doing something.
Get your shit together.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Although, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes you when you're that young, sometimes I feel like you have this pressure to get your shit together, but when I look back, I'm like, I wish I would have taken longer at that age and just kind of enjoyed those things.
I was going to go into broadcasting.
Yeah.
When I was in grade 12, I was doing you had to do like a career and personal planning course, and so you get work experience. So I interned at CBC Radio in Vancouver for a couple of months. And I was going to BCIT at night school while I was in grade 12 to get the prerequisites so I could get into the broadcast journalism program. And I fully intended on doing 1 year of skiing just for a break because I wasn't very good scholastically. And then I was going to enroll back, and I got accepted into BCIT, and I just never went.
So why is that? What was it about, that year of skiing that kind of compelled you into this into the ski industry?
I got addicted to the travel and the lifestyle, and it was fun kind of being on the mountain every day.
Yeah.
I grew up I was growing up in the city. I only went skiing for a week a year in the mountains, but I effectively was a city kid.
Right.
Now here I am all of a sudden being churned out onto the mountain every day. And then after that one season I started at Silver Star, and then at the end of that season, I got offered that job in Australia. So now here I am traveling. I never thought I would go skiing in Australia. Like that was never a thought in my mind.
Yeah.
And that just sort of opened up the world of travel, and that led to kind of just improving my skills as a ski instructor, which is my job. And then that led to an offer in Europe to go. And
oh wow!
And then all of a sudden, it's like I'm just getting these opportunities that I probably never thought I was going to have.
No doubt.
And they seemed more interesting than going back to school because I was never a very good student. So I'm like, it's just another year.
So then when you did go back to school, you were in ski resort operations and management?
Yeah, so I ended up finding the ski resort operations and management program at Selkirk College, which is based here in Nelson. And that was just sort of after being in skiing for 4 or 5 years, just sort of ended up crossing paths with people, especially, bosses that were like, hey, like you should think about this program if you're looking at kind of moving up in the ski industry and getting away from just doing frontline, seasonally based work.
Right.
So that seemed like it was a good way to go back to school while still getting to pursue skiing because it still excited me.
So that brings you back to Nelson, but then once you graduate, then you're gone again.
Yeah, gone again. Yeah, I spent a season in Colorado, which was part of the school program. So I just happened to do my work term down in Colorado, and then I came back and ended up working. I worked for a summer for Doppelmayr building chairlifts, which was kind of fun. And I did that over at Red Mountain in Rossland, and then I went to Apex in Penticton and spent a year as a ski school director. And then I jumped ship over to Revelstoke. That was 2008, so Revy was just opened.
Yeah.
And spent 3 years in Revelstoke as the assistant director of the ski school there, and did some more kind of sales and marketing and some other kind of fun stuff with Revy, and then got offered a spot down here at Whitewater in 2010, summer 2010. And that's I've been here ever since, so 13 years now.
13 years, it's crazy. So what if no one's ever been to Whitewater, what kind of makes it unique relative to maybe some of the other ones in the area?
Well, it really feels like a little community-based ski area. It's got there's no village or anything up there, so there's just your chairlifts and your day lodge,
right?
Which is not very common for destination resorts, obviously. So Nelson is the village for the ski area, effectively, right, which is pretty rare. Like, it's much more common in Europe to see it kind of based that way, right?
Right.
And then the terrain is phenomenal. The snowfall is amazing. And the community of skiers that are up there just seem really unique. Yeah. And really tight-knit, which they're probably the same in Fernie, and it's a bit the same in Revy as well. And, Rosslyn for sure is like that. But, yeah, Whitewater just has a kind of a special vibe of people that help kind of bring it all together.
Yeah. Well, we were there yesterday, and a guy kind of took us under his wing and showed us a few places. So I'm sure the locals will, take him to behind the barn or whatever.
Yeah.
It's not cool. You're not supposed to tell people where the secret stashes are.
Yeah, you're not supposed to, but at the same time, most of the secret stashes aren't so secret anymore. Whitewater's exploded in popularity in the last 15 years. So. How long has it been around for? As a ski resort? It first opened in 1974 or 75. Mid-70s. Yeah. Okay, yeah, because one of the guys we were chatting with yesterday, for him, he's been out here, say, 5 years, and he was saying to him it feels like a flashback to the 80s. It's just kind of like that really small, chill kind of, like you said, not even really a resort. It's got like a little pub and whatever. Yeah, so. There's a day lodge and a rental shop, and I mean, they're building more buildings now, but it's like there's no condos or any of that sort of stuff. There's none of the glitz and glamour of the rest of BC skiing. Is there anything like that? Like, is there ever any talk of stuff like that happening out there? There'll be little whispers of it every now and again, and obviously there is a master plan, online you can review it, and it shows resort development happen, but that's standard. But I think if you have ever been up there, you'll notice pretty quickly that the valley is super steep and narrow. Yeah. So, wedging in a bunch of condos isn't going to happen, and it's debatable if there's enough water up there to support thousands of homes or whatever. It's just sort of, it seems a bit impractical that they're going to ever put in the 200 or 300 homes that are listed on the resort development plan. So yeah, that's fair. So so you're in the ski industry, you're enjoying yourself, but you decide to go back to school. Yeah. So you got your Bachelor of Commerce in Entrepreneurial Management. So what kind of motivated you to do that? So I was getting a bit bored of the ski industry in that I was sort of stuck in middle management, running ski schools and, running, and like in the summertime I would just be on trail crew projects and didn't really, no chance to advance anywhere. And Whitewater especially, there was no way I was going to be able to move up into the upper management side of the resort. And but I was interested in the business aspects of running ski areas, so I figured business school might be for me. And so I looked around, and Royal Roads University in Victoria, which is primarily an online school, had a really, really good transfer agreement with Selkirk College. So I was able to get all my credits, even though they were, 10 years old at this point. They were able to transfer all my school credits from Selkirk over to Royal Roads, and I got into their business school. And I could do it from Nelson. So over 2 years, I was able to pick away at completing a degree. And so why entrepreneurial? The reason I ask is you mentioned that you didn't really have, business wasn't really in the family, entrepreneurialism wasn't really in the family. So what attracted you to that? Yeah, I don't really know what attracted me to it, but I always had ideas, and a lot of it was based around tourism, like that. Working in tourism for so long and being in different aspects of tourism, from ski industry and to cruise ships, and you saw how hospitality was run in different ways, and I obviously would deal with tour companies and all these other things that were like, hey, there's some cool stuff here that could be adjacent to skiing. That maybe would be enjoyable for me, and breweries and bars was one of the things that was sort of in that realm.
Yeah.
So I figured, hey, why don't I go to school and understand better how business operates, and then I can hopefully bring an idea, take one of these ideas and run with it.
Yeah.
On my own, because it was, it just seemed like it's the right time to try. So if I'm going to try something, I should do it now. I was 31 or 32, something like that.
Right.
So it's like this, it felt right to go that way.
So while you're in school, that's kind of where the idea comes from to start a brewery. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's where I started really exploring the brewery idea. I had spent some time when I was in Europe kind of hanging out in a couple of breweries in small little ski villages, and I really liked them. And it's always sort of a cliched, like, hey, you're going to write down an idea on a cocktail napkin and we're going to go ahead and do this. But it was one of those things where I was like, I would joke around with a couple friends about these ideas, but I never really could shake it.
Yeah.
And so I figured, I may as well kind of write a plan for it as my school project, so I can kind of tackle this idea while I'm in school. It makes sense. And the stars just kind of started to align out of that. And I was able to, I got a lot of research done. I didn't know anything about the brewing industry. I knew a little bit about pubs, but nothing about the production of beer.
It's actually a really good idea, because you could have, like, as you're doing that, especially because it's, school, so you're doing it as part of your education, but you do the research, because it could have talked you out of it, right? At least, by doing it, it's like, okay, I've done all the research. This is a terrible idea. And then at least it wouldn't have nagged at you for the rest of your life. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But, so what about it was, because you were mentioning that you were on, there was some sort of program set up where you actually had to pitch the idea?
Yeah, so we pitched it as part of the final presentation of the project. We pitched it to a panel of real-life entrepreneurs in like a Dragon's Den style pitch over a few days in downtown Vancouver. And I did really well in the presentation, and the professor loved it. And, all the panel of entrepreneurs, politely said, yeah, this is great. Like, you did a really nice job on this. And then afterwards, one of the guys actually pulled me aside and said, are you really serious? Can we actually set up a meeting and have a real conversation about this?
Yeah.
And so that was the first time where I was like, oh, wow, like there actually is something here. It's not just like, here's my paper. Thanks for my degree. Thank you.
Yeah, totally.
So that's kind of what kept me going forward, because I wasn't sure if I was going to pursue it or not. And so when that guy said, I want to give you money for this to help you get going, and we can get this ball rolling. And this we're talking 2015, kind of August, September of 2015 at that point. And right when the beer industry in BC was like exploding.
Right.
I mean, it has been ever since then. So the timing was right. Ended up being that guy wanted me to put the brewery down on the coast. And I wasn't interested so much in that. I really wanted to keep something somewhere in the Kootenays.
Yeah.
And so I ended up not working out with him, but then I was able to keep the ball rolling and finding business partners here in Nelson, and Tracy, who's sitting at the bar doing accounting work right now, and the brewmaster, Mike. So both of them were already in town as well, and we were able to form a group to take it over the finish line. So
that's awesome. So why did you choose Nelson? Because even if you want to keep it in the area, Kootenays, I'm sure there was other options. What was special about Nelson?
Yeah, so one was partly demographics. The Nelson's pretty big relative to Golden and Fernie and Revelstoke. Those are the other three places I was looking at. So that was one of the motivating factors. It seemed like there was more of an opportunity to support another brewery. At the time, there was Nelson Brewing Company, who's been here since 1991, and they operated on a very traditional, wholesale beer model.
Right.
There was another one called Torchlight just down the street. They were quite young at the time. They might have been 2 years old at the time. And so it felt like there was a real hole in the market here. And it felt kind of right. I owned a house in Revelstoke at the time.
Okay.
And so I was really leaning in Revelstoke, and at that point there only was Begbie. They were still downtown. They hadn't built their new brewery up the hill yet. And so I thought maybe there's something here. But it felt, Revelstoke at that time felt too seasonal. Like, it's busy for a month in February and it's busy for a month in July, August, or 2 months.
Yeah.
And 9 months of the year, that town is sleepy. Whereas Nelson has a way more a longer period of tourism coming through, and the town just feels more vibrant with more locals kicking around all the time. There's a lot more of a food and dining and nightlife scene in Nelson.
Yeah.
So it felt like it might be a better fit for here. So that's kind of ultimately what it came down to.
So for you, what was the original concept of the brewery? Like, we were talking a little bit about how some of the older breweries, because they were really back then designed as manufacturing plants almost, right? Like, there was no real interface with the public.
No,
right?
You legally couldn't have a bar. You could have a tasting room or a tasting bar, but you couldn't charge money for the samples you gave out.
Yeah.
And that all changed in 2012, I think it was.
Okay.
And when the BC government allowed breweries to have their own pub tied to their manufacturing facility.
Right.
Where you could serve full pints of beer and have a restaurant if you wanted, and all these things. So that was what we really wanted to target, because you can do it at a small scale. You can make little amounts of beer, 1,000 liters at a time, just 800 liters at a time, and be profitable because you get to sell your beer at full markup off your own beer taps.
Right. So that was your vision from day one, was kind of, have a place where people can come and hang out?
Yeah, keep it small, make it focused on the tap room, and put it in a location that was really convenient to access. That was one of the rubs that I had when I went and was doing my research, which involved going to breweries all over the place. Super hard.
Not a bad job.
You were often in industrial areas, and they were becoming kind of cool neighborhoods. If you picture some of the stuff in East Van back in 2012, 2013, they were just on the way up. But it wasn't that much fun to try to find them, and I was like, no, if you're going to be in a small town, you got to be in the middle of the busiest street. Like, if you can find that, then it'll make it so much easier for the customer to be able to come to your location, and we can figure out a way to tuck the equipment in the back. Some of the bigger breweries, you're sitting in their giant warehouse, and it feels like you're sitting in a warehouse. Yeah. Which is not conducive to enjoying yourself when you're out for a night on the town, right? Like, it just doesn't have the right vibe to it.
Well, it's funny because I was talking to Miranda. She's one of the brewers in Golden at Whitetooth. But she came from Banff Ave Brewing.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever been to Banff Ave Brewing?
I have not been to. I've been past it. I know where it is, but I haven't been in it.
So I've known her for a while, and she Banff Ave Brewing is awesome, and it's part of a great group. But the brewery itself is on the second floor.
Oh, yeah.
And so, great place for, like, if you're in Banff, go hang out. So, as a place to hang out, it's awesome. But as a brewer, it's just like it's a pain in the ass, right? Because you're hauling everything. Everything's going up and down steps. So,
oh yeah, for sure.
When you think about the benefit, I would say of almost like a warehouse brewery from a brewer's perspective, that's probably optimal, right?
Oh yeah, if you can have a bay door that you can drive a forklift into, like, that would be phenomenal.
Yeah.
And we would love to have that here as well. We haul like, Nelson's on a hillside, right? So obviously the front of the tap room is at the sidewalk level, but when you get to the back of the building, we're like a half a story underground.
Yeah.
So whenever you get to, like, just taking our grain out at the end of the day for the farmers, we bring it up a half a flight of stairs and put it out in the back alley, and our farmer comes and grabs it from there. When we do all of our wholesale distribution, like, kegs have to be taken upstairs
and
then loaded into the back of the van. Same with our cans, like everything's hand loaded kind of into the back of the van and driven around. There's no just filling up a pallet in the middle of a huge space and forklifting it where you want. Totally. So it's annoying.
Well, and that's what I was laughing at when I was meeting with Miranda, because she had this like big grin on her face, because from her perspective, just being in a brewery where all of that stuff is like laid out properly in terms of, she was just like, oh my God.
It would be a dream. For sure. Yeah.
But to your point, when you're thinking about it from the perspective of the customer, you know, this is obviously a really intimate, you know, cool setting for them to come into. So
yeah, and they like people ask us all the time, like, where's the brewery? Like there is a window in the tap room, and we have one part of our operation. So maybe like 20% of our brewing space is visible from the tap room. The other 80% is hidden in the back of the building.
Right.
If you're walking down on Baker Street, you would never know that there could be a brewery hiding in this building.
Yeah, no doubt.
And you know, it says brewing company on the door. Like, people will open the door all the time thinking it's a coffee shop.
Yeah.
Like, it says brewing on the door. I'm like, what do you think we mean by brewing? But it's really camouflaged.
Yeah.
But I think that's what helps make the tap room really kind of what it is, because it's like, well, it's a cozy pub that just happens to make the beer at it, not a brewery that kind of put in a few tables, you know, with some hacked up kegs and stuff to.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Is like, and that's, it's almost like when newer breweries start, it's really with a customer focus. Whereas, like we said before, because, you know, back in the day, you couldn't even have thought about it from a customer's perspective. So I think that's what lends, you know, places like just, it gives it that it's unique, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a new experience. So for you, you mentioned that you have two partners. I'm always curious, what made you kind of take on the role that you did versus why were you never attracted to the idea of maybe brewing the beer yourself?
So the brewing side, to be good at brewing, I think you need to be good at science.
Okay.
And I am not good at science. So that was kind of the first thing. I've made a couple of batches of beer, you know, the home brewing style stuff, and it was neat, but it didn't excite me the way that, you know, you see some brewers, they really get excited. And if you talk to our brewmaster, like, he'll talk your ear off for days on end about like just the little minutia of brewing, and he's excited about it. And I'm not that way.
Right.
When it comes to the production side, I'm not very good at tasting beer. Like, I don't have a palate to pick up all the weird flavors. Like, it's beer and I like it.
Yeah.
And I'll drink all the styles. And so I don't think I've got it on that side. I'm fascinated by marketing in general, so I was sort of drawn to the branding and marketing side of things. So that kind of naturally has kind of led me into being that part of the role. And then our other business partner, Tracy, like, she just came from a lot more of like a business administration kind of background and a financial background. So her suits really led themselves to dealing with the money side of the business and dealing with a lot of the government red tape sort of side. I mean, her and I together filled out all the paperwork to get the thing going. But now Tracy looks after most of the, you know, registering new products and kind of all the reporting we have to do. Like, there's unending amounts of government reporting that we have to do because we're making a controlled substance. So it's sort of things that are like, all right, well, someone's got to do it. So.
Yeah. So did you have an idea of what type of beer you guys wanted to brew, or did you kind of leave that open?
No, we left it open to the brewer, and that was a decision that we made early on, that we're like, we're not going to focus on any one niche of beer in terms of like just being a Belgian brewery or being an IPA brewery or what have you. Partly a function of where we are and where there's not so much competition here that we need to drill down to that level. And then partly because we don't think that at the time that the community around us was educated enough in beer in general to sort of want that level of specificity from their breweries. So, you know, Mike traditionally is really enjoys making lagers. So we brew a lot of German style kind of lagers. we'll brew some British ales. We've been playing more with getting into some Belgian styles. So we've started doing a lot more kind of sour beers and working with barrels and things like that. And that took us a couple of years. That took Mike, 6 or 8 months just to research what goes into it, because he's so specific about what he does. He didn't want to just put some liquid in a barrel and see what happens. He wanted to plan it out as best as he could.
Yeah, absolutely.
To try to arrive at a good result. So we're starting to get into little bits of that, but we'll kind of go everywhere. And now we've got a young guy, Gus, who's from Alberta as well, and he started brewing for Mike like a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, almost now. And so he brings in some new ideas, and we'll turn him loose on the system.
Yeah.
A couple, every now and again, and give him carte blanche to make what he wants to make. And so it's kind of fun that it brings in some new viewpoints. And
absolutely.
And we ended up with a well-rounded board of lots of different styles and flavors kind of all the time. So,
well, we were in here the other night trying some. So the milk stout.
Yeah.
That was Trevor's favorite.
That was the fave. Yeah. The milk stout is very nice. And that's one of Gus's. Oh, let's say, is that one of Gus's beers? No, it's not. That's one of Mike's.
But it is nice, especially as a brewer, so Gus coming on, to kind of give him a little bit of freedom, it's because there are some breweries where it's like, okay, here's the beers we make, here's the recipes, just execute the recipes. But to have that, you did mention that brewing is a science, but there is also an art, and there is also some fun to be had. Right?
Yeah, totally. Oh yeah, for sure. There's a ton of creativity that goes into it.
Yeah.
It's sort of like cooking versus baking, right? You got to be exact, but you can play around with the ingredients and have a good time. And it took a while. Gus had to prove that he could kind of follow the directions first. Fair. And then once he sort of showed that he was capable of doing things on his own and could brew unsupervised, essentially. Yeah. Then it was like, okay, great, let's get you into recipe writing, and he's got ideas, and so it's starting to them two together developing Gus's ideas, and when they come on the board, they're popular, so it's good fun. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, with a name like Gus, you just got to trust the guy.
Yeah, right.
Where does the name come from, Backroads?
Backroads was one of about 50 different names that I had, and I literally, when I was going through the naming process while I was in school, I had all these ideas, probably close to 50 different ideas for names. With friends and family, we narrowed that down to about 12 or 14 ideas.
Wow.
And I double checked. So I went on like the BC corporate online to verify that all those names were available in BC. And then I literally put out a Survey Monkey to my friends on Facebook, and got a couple hundred responses back. And I told them, just pick your favorites and pick as many. Like, if you like 5 names, then pick all 5.
Right.
And Backroads was the most picked.
Really?
And 50% of the votes were for Backroads.
That's hilarious.
Which was kind of surprising, because it was not my first choice for a name. I think my first choice is one of the least picked ones out of all of it. So,
what was it?
It was going to be called Devil's Range Brewing, and the Devil's Range is a series of mountains in the Valhallas, which are just to the west of town here.
Right.
So that was my favorite of all of it.
So, going back to the ski industry, you mentioned that there are some parallels between the ski industry and the beer industry. Were you able to take a lot of what you learned in the ski industry and kind of apply it?
Yeah. The biggest parallels is the amount of collaboration that goes on. So, ski industry might be changing now with Vail coming in and stomping on everyone. But prior to that, the ski areas really worked well together in this province. Yeah. They would, we go to an annual conference every year, and we all shared ideas about best practices, and we all skied each other's resorts all the time. They had great reciprocal pass deals to make sure that staff could ski for free at all the other, that's all gone now. But when I was coming up, that was super normal. They were competitive with each other, but they were all unique, and they all worked together to grow the industry as a whole and to attract international clients to the province. And the beer industry seems to be the same way, where yes, we compete with all the other craft breweries, but at the end of the day, we all really are just competing with AB InBev and Molson Coors to get a slice of the overall pie. And so if all of us do well, and we can attract people to craft beer from macro beer, then you have a good chance of winning over that person for a lifetime,
right,
to switch overall. And it doesn't help if one craft brewer doesn't do a good job. That might turn that person off from wanting to try craft beer ever again. So it's in our best interest to help each other out and to make sure that we as a whole present kind of something different than just your big beer, right?
Yeah, and it is interesting because I think, maybe going back 10 years ago, maybe the end consumer was a little bit more patient with craft breweries, and if something was off, they'd be like, okay, it's a new brewery. Now it seems like even just coming out of the gates, you have to be dialed in.
You can't miss. You can't miss if you're starting out brand new now. Like if that person comes in for the first time and has a poor experience, either the beer isn't up to snuff, or the experience in the tap room isn't there. Like you've lost them. There's no real opportunity to try again.
Yeah.
And maybe that person will try other brewery. Hopefully they try other breweries and they realize that, okay, it's just the one operation that's maybe didn't do it for them.
Right.
But yeah, you have having good beer is table stakes now. You have to do it.
So in Nelson, just as a city, do you call yourself a city, or is it?
We're a city. Yeah, okay. We're a city officially.
So there's 3 breweries here.
Yeah.
How would you describe, I guess, the beer culture in Nelson, and is it still fairly collaborative between the 3 of you, or is it getting more competitive, or what's the sense there?
No, pretty collaborative overall, I would say. We all get along pretty well, all the owners of each of the breweries. We all know each other. We'll hang out and have beers together, at industry events and things like that. We work together to produce our own beer festival here in town, which we just started. It was supposed to start in 2020. Well, obviously it got delayed for a couple of years, but we work together on those levels. And the beer culture, luckily Nelson is really open to drinking craft beer.
Yeah.
Partly because Nelson Brewing Company has been around since 1991. So the idea of drinking locally made beer has been a thing in Nelson for 30 years.
Yeah.
Already. So it's.
Yeah, that's fair.
So that opened up the door for us to come in, because locals are not going to have any sort of preconceived notion like, oh, we can't drink it because it's just this is just a garage brewery. People are stoked to support that because they love locally made products. They want to know where their stuff comes from here.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of things that made it possible for more of us to open up here because of that.
So I talk a lot about, or ask a lot about, challenges in the industry. Obviously, COVID messed up everything.
Yeah, that was a big one.
But right now, it seems to me that inflation is crazy.
Costs are wild. Yeah.
So for you guys, how are you, something like that, how do you overcome that? And then it seems like the taxes go up constantly, so that just adds to the inflation.
Yeah, it's taxes, it's raw inputs. I think the biggest one we've seen is the price of grain. When we first opened, our pale and Pilsner malt was probably $1 a kilo, $25, $26 a bag. And now it's upwards of $70 a bag. So it's nearly tripled in the 5 years that we've been open. Luckily, grain's still one of the cheaper things we put in. Hops get really expensive, as crops don't do well in certain years, or, certain regions have failures. So you're always being pushed on costs for your raw ingredients coming in. And, war in Ukraine doesn't help right now because of the global grain market. And even though our grain's coming from Saskatchewan and being malted in Armstrong, it's still priced on the world market.
Yeah.
So you got to deal with all that stuff. Transportation costs are insane. The price of diesel specifically is what really impacts us, because everything is used diesel from the grain production through to the shipping.
Yeah.
The only thing that goes on gasoline is us taking the beer in the final form in our van. But even this summer, it was $2 a liter. And we're driving off to Fernie and Revelstoke and Kelowna to deliver beer to liquor stores, and we didn't budget for $2 a liter. Things like that, right? So it's just constantly coming at you. the taxes are the least of the worries.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the taxes is probably the lowest. Like it's an increase and it sucks, but it's probably the smallest increase of all the other increases we've dealt with.
Well, and especially because I guess from a taxing perspective, there's a level of predictability to that increase where the other inputs are kind of, oh shit, all of a sudden it's just like,
Exactly. Yeah. We know every year on June 1st, that the federal excise tax goes up, and it's a very stated formula. This year, I think there's a bit of uproar about it because I believe it's tied to inflation. And so inflation for 2022 was crazy, and I don't know that the government's going to give us a break. Whereas we know excise was going up 2% or 3%.
Right.
But what's 2 or 3% of 3 or 4 cents a liter? Like it wasn't going up that much, but now it's going to go up 8 or 9% this year. So it's a much larger number.
Right.
And for little guys like us, it's not as big a deal because we just don't make enough beer for it to add up to much money.
Right.
But it sure sucks for the guys that are making, 30 or 50,000 hectoliters a year.
So another challenge that you had mentioned, and I thought maybe this might tie into what your long-term vision might be, but is just let's say the younger generation, kids these days, the trends towards what they're drinking.
Yeah.
So are you seeing that they're not drinking as much beer, or what's the trend that you're seeing as a challenge for yourself?
So I think in general, you're seeing younger people not drinking as much alcohol altogether, and then you're also seeing them move away from beer a little bit more and moving towards the RTD categories primarily. Mm-hmm. So those two things combined together make it more difficult for when you want to ensure you've got new people coming into your place.
Right.
People still want an atmosphere to socialize in, but now you've got to think about what types of products are you offering in order to keep them in your room.
Right.
Because they still want to socialize with each other. They're just doing it differently than you and I would have done when we were 19 and 20. So. Well,
and that's what I was thinking is, does that sort of, when you look at where you want to be in 5 years, do those things factor into, your vision?
They have to now.
Yeah.
They didn't when we wrote the business plan, 6.5, 7 years ago when I was in that process. That was not a thing that I was thinking about. We were looking, you're looking back in 2015. I'm looking back 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And looking at the growth of the industry in, Oregon, California, and then we're looking at how BC's going, and we're making predictions based on what we've seen historically in some of those Western states.
Yeah.
And looking at Vancouver's growth and going, okay, this is where we think beer is going to go in BC based on what happened in Oregon.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you got this curveball of vodka sodas on the market. And it's like, well, wait a second, like no one saw that coming.
Right.
So you kind of have to now kind of look forward and go, well, wait a second, what's the mix going to be? We have stainless steel tanks that can produce alcoholic beverages.
Right.
Like we can do just about anything in here, and we want to make beer, and we will always make beer, but maybe we now have to be more open to making things that aren't beer.
Right.
From time to time.
How has the legalization of cannabis changed the craft beer industry? And do you see are more consumers going that route? I mean, you're in Nelson, and
so,
I feel like
so
cannabis has been...
This is a great question because we are in Cannabis Central. And so here, the impact is zero because there was so much cannabis in this town ahead of time.
Yeah.
And people, whether or not you should, people use both simultaneously.
Right.
That's just what you do.
Yeah.
And so as for us on a micro level, the impact is zero. On a broader scale, across areas of the country where maybe cannabis wasn't so prevalent,
right?
Yeah, it very well could have an impact, and people choosing to use cannabis instead of using alcohol. I think what will be the really interesting thing is if and when cannabis consumption lounges are allowed, and that will come for sure.
Oh yeah,
it has to. It's already starting in, I think, Nevada. Is already having cannabis hotels that are popping up where you can use cannabis in your room or in a pub-like environment. And I'm pretty sure the province of BC has already said they're starting to explore that. And why can't you have a cafe where you can either ingest cannabis or drink cannabis, maybe not smoke it outright, but I think that's coming. And I think that might be a bit more of a disruption. When there's easier ways to consume it socially that's not your living room.
Right. So you mentioned about Revelstoke, and just maybe comparing Revelstoke to Nelson to some degree. You know, you mentioned that, Revelstoke is a little bit more clustered in terms of when people go there. So, like, a couple months in the summertime and a month in the
couple months in the winter,
and then I guess implying that Nelson is a little bit more robust in how tourists are coming here. What is it about Nelson that makes it unique in that way, and what is it that's attracting people throughout the year?
Nelson's really has a really, really well developed arts and culture and culinary scene that has been here for a very long time. Nelson sort of established itself as an arts center probably in the 1980s, early 1990s. It's always had a real counterculture vibe. So you get a lot of, eccentric types that are here already. And then that kind of draws more of counterculture type folks that want to experience, weird Nelson. So you get this mix of people that is unlike other ski towns. I mean, Revelstoke is, it's logging and railroads and mountaineering. And whereas Nelson is all those things plus 7 or 8 more things. The other towns are changing. They're like Revy especially is catching up.
Yeah.
I think Fernie is catching up. Golden's probably starting to get more noticed as well. But Nelson's been so well established as like the cultural hub of the Kootenays. And so, as you were saying before, I came here for skiing, and I worked in the ski industry for 5 years, and I was always up at the mountain. And the year that we started the brewery, and I worked downtown for 1 full year, and I realized there's 70% of the town that doesn't care at all about skiing or mountains or outdoor lifestyle. Like, that's just not in their realm of their world.
Right.
And here they are in Nelson for completely different reasons, and that was such a foreign concept for me living in the outdoor world.
Yeah.
And just being in those industries and being in Revelstoke where everyone was like, it seemed like everyone was there because they were there skiing or mountaineering, except for the odd guy that was working for CP or CN, and it was like, well, they just got stationed there.
Yeah.
And they weren't super happy about it, but they did it.
It is funny, hey, when you go to a place for a specific reason, like I spend a lot of time in Fernie to mountain bike, and you just kind of see it as a mountain bike kind of mecca or something like that, and then you see all these people that are there for totally different reasons.
Yeah.
But Nelson to me is super special. It's been really cool being able to kind of hang out here for the last couple of days.
Yeah, like the dining and nightlife and entertainment scene in Nelson far exceeds the other towns. And it's a culmination of like how many restaurants, I forget what the stat is, there's 45 or 50 restaurants in downtown Nelson.
Yeah.
Like it's a stupid number for the population that's here. And that probably has something to do with, Selkirk having a great culinary arts program up there. And then you've got, 3 or 4 nightclubs and all these live music venues, and same thing. There's this pool of people that are here to play music. And then, the college has a big music program. So you're always feeding in, new people coming into town that are part of those worlds. And so they just creates this little kind of circle of stuff going on all the time that just seems outsized for how big the town is. Like it's sort of, Nelson just punches above its weight class when it comes to nightlife and entertainment, for sure.
Well, and there's just a vibe. Like, we do 3 mountain festivals now. So we do Banff and Jasper, and now we're doing Revy. And one of the things that I've always been, really interested in small, relatively small mountain towns, mountain cities. They just always have a unique vibe to them. So this was a really fun opportunity for me to just come and and really get a sense of what all these places are. All the places that you've mentioned, so Golden, Fernie, Revy, and Nelson have all been on my trip, and it's just really cool to just see like how each of them is so unique. And so congratulations on your success.
Thank you.
I think it's awesome. I've been wanting to come and see what you guys are all about for a while. So really good to see that you guys are obviously doing well and
and
making great beer. So congratulations.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Cheers.